But a lot of this reflects the division that existed in Islam. One of the first things, of course, is the question of succession. Now, as I mentioned, Abu Bakr is selected as the successor to the Prophet, as he's referred to. But before that, there was that question. Some people believed that the selection of the successor to the Messenger of God, is another way that Muhammad is referred to, should be based on the community deciding. Others, however, felt that leadership should pass to a relative of Muhammad. As a prophet of God, the assumption was that there is something special about the line of Muhammad. And so they wanted Ali. And so the minority group wanted to say Ali as the successor to Muhammad. Now, eventually, Ali will become a caliph, but before that, there's a lot of tension. When Ali does become the caliph toward the end of that period, civil war breaks out. He's opposed by a group that included Abu Bakr's daughter, who was one of Muhammad's later wives, and the governor of Syria, a man named Muawiyah. Ali tries to arbitrate this agreement, and tries to come to a compromise where everybody will remain united. But some people felt that he had conceded or compromised too much. And by compromising too much to Muawiyah and others, that he had compromised the faith. And so a group of them would later assassinate Ali. Muawiyah kind of waits out all of this, and in the death of Ali, seizes control. And so it passes from this caliphate of succession to a dynastic rule. And we'll talk about the Umayyad Caliphate, but it was essentially Muawiyah's son was going to succeed him, and the son after him was going to succeed him, etc. So there's this tension because of the majority wanting a successor elected, minority wanting family line. That's exacerbated by the assassination of Ali. It's further exacerbated in the 20 years after, during the 10th day of the Muslim month, Muharram. In 680, the grandson of Muhammad, the son of Ali, a man named Hussein, was persuaded to lead a rebellion against those Umayyads, the family that had taken control in Syria. He and his army were essentially set up and slaughtered at Karbala, which is a city in modern Iraq. He was killed on the 10th day of Muharram, and his death is commemorated by that minority group as the celebration of Ashura. Ashura, meaning 10, is commemoration of Hussein's death. And so that's another thing added to the minority group's frustration. They had expected these changes and they weren't seen. What we're talking about here is the development of a divide between the majority group, known as Sunni Muslims, and the minority group, known as Shia. Sometimes you might hear the term Shiite, both used sometimes interchangeably. So the things that led to the historical division between Sunni and Shias were who's going to follow Muhammad, who's going to be the leader after Muhammad, the death of Ali, and the death of Hussein. Now we'll talk more about the differences between Sunnis and Shias later on. Questions about any of that? Anything I need to clarify? So the death of Ali, as I said, allowed Muawiyah to seize control to establish a dynastic caliphate known as the Umayyad Caliphate. Muawiyah became the 5th caliph and moved the capital from Arabia to the city of Damascus in Syria. And so afterward, the caliphate was essentially a dynasty rather than chosen by the community, but there's still that, at least, they would have these kind of fake elections where the results are already kind of decided, but you're still given the right to vote for the right person, right? As long as you're voting for the right person. But as you can see, of course, the dynasty continues beyond Muawiyah. And so I don't want to talk about all the caliphs, just give you an example of a pretty important one. A man named Abdul Malik. Caliph from 685 to 705 represents kind of the high point of the Umayyad Caliphate. And so this is after the civil wars had died down and before a revolution coming at the end of that, 750. He would standardize coinage among this realm, would collect a variety of sayings of Muhammad that we'll talk about, fostered Islamic scholarship, sponsored public art. During his reign, the Dome of the Rock, pictured here, is constructed, right? So this is the top of what used to be the Temple Mount. This is the Wailing Wall, or the Western Wall, down here in Israel and Jerusalem. But during this time period, you have a large expansion, the largest that the Islamic Empire gets to, spreading from Spain almost entirely to China. To give you an idea of that on the map, this orange area here is where Muhammad, the Islamic rule under Muhammad, and then gradually spreading throughout, and then by the time of the Umayyads, all the way to Spain, into India, almost into China. Later in the reign of the Umayyads, some Shias and other non-Arab Muslims began to feel that the Umayyad leaders were too secular, right? That they had political power, but they weren't deeply religious. And so gradually, this group solidified their support and then defeated the Umayyad Caliphate and killed the last of the Umayyad caliphs. This group, the Abbasids, moved the control of Islamdom to the city of Baghdad, modern-day Iraq, bringing in other types of culture. Right? And so Arabic culture, a lot of, up to that point, but now Persian elements added into Islam, and especially the aesthetics of Islam. Rather interesting caliph during the time was a man named Harun al-Rashid, known in the West as Aaron the Wise. He controlled the largest united Abbasid caliphate before it started to kind of disintegrate into these statelets that were largely independent, even though they were supposed to be connected. He is the Abbasid caliph whose exploits are the subject of the 1001 Nights. A lot of his rule was relatively in peace and prosperity. And although Muslims were making inroads into the eastern part of the Christian Empire, the Byzantine Empire, relationship with the West was pretty positive during the time of Harun al-Rashid. He corresponded with Charlemagne. There was a lot of exchange, technological and economics exchange between Muslims and the West, Western Christians. He would establish a hostel for Christian pilgrims going to Jerusalem, right, to allow them to have a place to stay, allow them safe travel. He would set up a hospital, an observatory in Baghdad, and kind of served as a model for later rulers. During this time, at least the majority of this time, there's this kind of consolidation of the expansion of Islamdom, and the culture is reaching a high point as it's mixing all these trends together. Eventually, however, the Abbasid Caliphate starts breaking up into statelets, allowing for a group known as the Turks to take over. All right, so again, another map to see the expansion now into Africa, and still expanding in the west, but the Abbasids are, not the Abbasids, but the Muslims are stopped in Spain in the 8th century, right, so they don't extend into Western Europe, but there's still this push into Eastern Europe, affecting a lot of the Eastern or Byzantine Empire at the time. The Abbasids, as they kind of give way, lose their power, and power switches to a group of Ottomans or Turks, who will eventually take over a lot of that Eastern Christian empire, eventually moving to the city of Constantinople, which is renamed Istanbul. The official name change isn't until the 20th century, but that's the region we're talking about, modern-day Istanbul, which used to be Byzantium, Constantinople. It's been called a variety of things for centuries. But again, the move of the center, right? It was in Arabia, then it moves to Syria, then it moves to Iraq or Persia, and now it's moving into Istanbul. Rather interesting caliph during the time is a man named Suleiman, the Arabic form of Solomon. Suleiman was known as the Magnificent. He extended Ottoman sovereignty from Hungary to Iraq. Under his power, he had a very powerful navy in the Western Mediterranean and also in the Indian Ocean. But during his reign, Jews and Christians thrived in relative peace and harmony. He rebuilt much of what is contemporary Jerusalem. The present-day walls of what's called the Old City of Jerusalem were constructed during the time of Suleiman. There was a revival of the arts now, as there's kind of this synthesis, right, of all these different aspects. We have the Arabic culture, Turkish culture, Persian culture, and there's this kind of revival of arts and literature under the Ottomans, especially Suleiman. And so his rule is kind of considered as a golden age. The reign of the Ottomans will end with World War II, because the Ottomans side with the Germans and the Axis powers, and after the end of World War I, did I say one? I think I said one the first time. I said World War I, the end of World War I. Germany was in both, and so it got confusing there. So at the end of World War I, because they had sided with the Germans, the Allied powers cut up the Ottoman Empire. And so you have the development of modern-day countries. We'll talk about in the Middle East. We'll talk about that later. But that was the last caliphate during this time, historically. That's a lot of what, of course, ISIS or ISIL is trying to reclaim now. So if you paid attention to any of the news coming out of Syria and Lebanon, as ISIS is expanded in the region, they're trying to get back to that time of the caliphs, right, where there's this unity of religion and politics, and there's political power, united ummah together. And so it's an attempt to get back to those times. But after the end of World War I, there hasn't been an empire like there used to be. Certainly there are Muslim-controlled countries, Muslim-majority countries, some of which have some very strict religious and political laws. But it's not, the control and the power and the spread is nothing like it had been. Just to give you an idea of the region under various controls of various states through the 14th century into the 19th century. Right? Obviously beginning to get smaller to some extent. In the latter part of the 15th century, Spain, Christians in Spain will reconquer Spain, and so that shuts a lot of Muslims out. Eventually, in the 17th and 18th century, a lot of European powers will attempt to colonize Africa, and so that lessens Muslim power. Of course, slavery will draw a lot of people out of Africa. It's estimated that around 15 to 20% of slaves in the United States, North America, South America were actually Muslims, right? So that changes the face of this as well. But eventually, some of these countries will be cut out of this empire. Iraq, Iran, Egypt, Palestine, before it becomes Israel after World War II. Some of the other countries there, Turkey, will eventually be kind of cut out of that failing empire. So again, what I want you to know, the order, the last bullet point, and what happens during that time. Those are the major things to know about the caliphates. Are there any questions, though, that we can address before we finish up for today?
So was Suleiman, was he the last caliph?
No, he wasn't. He's right kind of like in the middle, but he's one that was very powerful, did a lot of things, was very well respected. It's kind of like the high point.
I guess the rest of the caliphs were all part of the Ottoman group.
Right, yeah, and so they last for several centuries. All right, well, we'll end there. On Tuesday, we'll start with talking about the differences between Sunnis and Shias as well as Islamic practice.